Number 8. Ricky Megee. Our first insane story is also a bit of a mystery. The Australian outback forms the backdrop for a harrowing but slightly sketchy story of surviving against the odds. In 2006, Ricky Megee became lost in the merciless Tanami Desert while traveling to take up a new job. He spent a grueling 71 days on his own, where he ate whatever he could find, even drinking rainwater and eventually his own pee. Threats included hungry dingoes, which Megee kept at bay with rocks placed in his makeshift shelters. Rescue came and Megee had a hell of a story to tell. But how did he wind up in the wilderness in the first place? Megee's version of events isn't consistent. Over time he said that his vehicle broke down, but also that he was slipped a Mickey and drugged by either a hitchhiker or hikers who buried him and ran off. He survived anyway, that's the most important thing. Driving through the outback is a dangerous journey, though you can also be at risk in the workplace, as this next case shows. It's quite literally a mind bender. Number 7. ANATOU Bugorski. If Ricky Megee's story has elements of a horror movie, then ANATOU Bugorski's situation wouldn't look out of place in sci-fi. What do we mean? Well, Bugorski was a scientist in Russia who got a bit too close for comfort to a particle accelerator in 1978. When he investigated an apparent fault at the accelerator, which was based at Protvino's Institute for High Energy Physics, he put his head inside the machine, unaware it was on. There wasn't a warning light that day, but Bugorski certainly saw stars, or rather an extremely bright flash of light. What happened? A proton beam containing close to 300,000 rads of ionizing radiation shot through his brain in an instant. Talk about the speed of light. Cutting through the back of his skull to his nose, it should have technically killed him. Fortunately for Bugorski, it happened quickly enough and in a contained part of his body to avoid death. That said, he didn't exactly get away with it. The left side of his face and his left ear stopped working, and he suffered seizures. Another extraordinary detail is that, following the accident, Bugorski just slept on it. Guess it's super awkward telling your employers that you got hit by a proton beam, huh? Following his traumatic experience, Bugorski promptly craved home comforts. However, home comforts aren't the order of the day for our next group of survivors. Number 6. The Lykovs. During the early 20th century, Russia was taken over by the Bolsheviks, and a certain religious group who found themselves unwelcome in the country after that were called Russian Orthodox Old Believers. Karp Lykov took the dramatic decision to escape persecution with his family. Joining him on this journey was Akolina, his wife, plus their children, Savine and Natalia. Where did they go? As far away as possible, it seems. They lived out in the forests of Siberia, some 150 miles from human contact. Here, they started a new and very basic life in a log cabin. Remember, this was 1936, and the family wouldn't be seen or heard from again until 1978. Geologists working in the area were astonished to find the Lykovs had been fending for themselves over decades, and they had no desire to go back to a populated area. The family grew with Dmitry and Agafia added to the clan, relying on materials such as bark to support themselves, using it sustainably by making it into shoes, and at times eating the stuff when nothing else was available. The situation was fascinating, yet perilous. In the early 1960s, Akolina passed away because of food shortages. Even more tragically, Savine, Natalia, and Dmitry met their end in 1981. Dmitry had pneumonia, and Savine and Natalia's kidneys gave out. It was just Karp and Agafia left. Unfortunately, they didn't see modern-day medical treatment as an option. 7 years later, Karp passed, and Agafia adjusted to life on her own in the wilderness. There, she lives to this day, though in an extraordinary development, she went to meet doctors in 2016 when her leg required attention. Exactly what that experience would have been like for her is hard to imagine. Harsh though it sounds, the Lykovs kept going with their remote existence, surviving against some quite frankly insane odds. Apparently the tradition will die with Agafia, though hopefully she's got a lot more life to live. From the open spaces of Siberia to the ocean depths for this next tale of survival. This one isn't for claustrophobes, so hold your breath. But before you start holding your breath, if you're liking this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe buttons if you haven't already. Number 5. Crew of Submarine 613. What happens when a torpedo fails to fire on a submarine? In 1960, a 14-strong crew part of Project 613, operating under the Barents Sea in the then Soviet Union, found out at their expense. 3 young cadets joined the team below the waves and received a crash course in naval disaster. A torpedo didn't launch, and so it was brought back inside for maintenance. All seemed well, if not a bit confusing. But it wasn't until the students were digging into their dinner that day when it quickly took a turn and the torpedo began to blow. An explosion was heard and felt before the bottom of the sub gave way. The sub then spent close to 15 minutes sinking 900 feet, or about 274 meters, right down to the sea floor. As you can imagine, the atmosphere down there was tense and quite literally heavy with all that water on top of them. Difficult to stay disciplined when you're facing a watery grave, right? At one stage, a gun was fired to shut everyone up. Luckily, it didn't spring any leaks. There was only one safe route off the sub, the torpedo tube. Imagine swimming into that coffin-like space, which was then sealed and filled with water. Why did they do that? It's so the escapee could acclimate themselves to the intense pressure at the bottom of the Barents. After that, you'd have to open the front of the tube and then hopefully swim to the surface. As well as oxygen masks, the crew were wearing rubber suits lined with camel hair. Doesn't sound like the most comfortable thing in the world, but good for keeping the cold out. A cable made buoyant with cork was released, giving the crew something to follow up as they made their agonizing way to the surface. This apparently took 3 hours. Go up too fast and the changing pressure takes its toll on your body. One man even suffered a ruptured lung from the ascent. And it's not like things let up once they reached the surface. They spent a long time waiting for help, bobbing around after an epic journey of survival. Incredibly, all the men made it out alive, going through one of the most insane stories of deep-sea rescue we've ever heard. The Barents made headlines again in 2000 when it played host to another, much more tragic submarine drama, that of the KOERKE. But that's a story for another day. Now, if the tale of Project 613 sounded extreme, wait till you hear about this next case. Instead of going under the sea, we're heading straight up into the air. Number 4. Juliane KOERKE. Christmas 1971 was a memorable one for German-Peruvian Juliane KOERKE. A teenager at the time, she was on board a plane flying over the Amazon rainforest. Accompanying her was her mother Maria, an ornithologist or bird researcher. The family was accustomed to living in these types of environments, but even so, nothing could prepare Juliane for what was about to happen. The plane was struck by lightning and fell from the sky. It then broke apart, sending Juliane plunging alone towards the vast rainforest. Sounds like something out of a Mission Impossible movie, yet it's all true. Amazingly, she lived to tell the tale, though sadly the other passengers lost their lives, including her mother Maria. So an eye-popping turn of events. That said, Juliane's story of survival was only just the beginning. She made it through a 2-mile fall, and now it was just her in the jungle. With a broken collarbone and ruptured ligament, she wouldn't last long out there. Juliane was equipped to cope with the situation better than most, and at one point she had to clean maggots out of a wound using gasoline. She'd even put Bear Grylls to shame. She was pretty clued up, but overall endured a harrowing time out there in the Amazon. Being short-sighted, she relied on her glasses, which were lost in the jungle. Juliane used her one remaining shoe to find her way around, also making sure she didn't run into predators such as snakes. Thankfully, she found rescue after 10 days, and according to Juliane, the men couldn't believe their eyes when they saw her, and she needed to convince them that she wasn't some godlike being. Juliane was reunited with her father Hans Wilhelm, a biologist, after experiencing the most intense survival Christmas ever. And her grueling time stuck in the natural world didn't put her off from being among animals. She went on to become a mammologist. Juliane KOERKE was in dire straits, forced to wander through vast forest. Our next survivor was trapped in a confined space in a nerve-shredding scenario out at sea. Keep watching to find out. Number 3. Harrison Okene. Harrison Okene's job aboard the Jascon 4 tugboat was that of ship's cook. Probably figured all he needed to worry about would be flipping burgers and not burning the rice. Unfortunately, his voyage across the Atlantic was going to take an insane turn, one of which he was incredibly fortunate to survive. The Jascon 4 was helping an oil tanker remain stable when the powerful ocean swells flipped it upside down. When it happened, Okene was in an inconvenient but at the same time life-saving position. Can you guess? He was on the toilet. So when the tugboat flipped and started to sink, he was stuck in living quarters with a pocket of air reportedly measuring 4 feet in height, or just about 1.2 meters. It wasn't going to stay 4 feet forever though. The water level was rising, slowly but inevitable. Okene couldn't see in the darkness, and the chilling salt water proved to be a punishing environment for the young cook. Apparently, it began peeling his skin off, including the skin on his tongue. Ouch! A team of rescue divers found him and brought him home. The Jascon 4 was 98 feet, or just about 30 meters down. Okene was found as the sole survivor, with the vast majority of the crew deceased, and with one individual missing. What an amazing and shocking story of survival and endurance in open water. Harrison Okene was lucky to make it out of a situation where salt water was on the attack. Truman Duncan, on the other hand, was on dry land when disaster struck, and he had a lot more than water to worry about, as we'll soon discover. Number 2. Truman Duncan. As a rail worker, Truman Duncan from Texas was used to being around big locomotives. One day in 2006, however, he got way too close. Those who get nervous easily, look away now. This is an insane story of a brush with death, coupled with the determination to survive that frankly defies description. What happened? Duncan took a tumble from the moving train car he was on. Landing on the track, he realized he was now right in its path. To his horror, he went under the train and was reportedly dragged for 75 feet or about 23 meters. If that doesn't sound crazy enough, brace yourselves, he'd almost been cut in half by the force of the train. Need a moment to compose yourselves? Aside from one muscle holding his leg in place, Truman was in 2 pieces. Over half his blood had left his body, and he was a goner, right? Wrong. Apparently, Truman pulled himself together, maybe that wasn't the best expression to use, and called 911 on his cell phone. We can only imagine how that call went. An amazed response team extracted Truman and took him to the hospital. After no less than 23 surgeries and a ton of recovery time, he returned to work. Yes, he survived this near-death experience in a slim 1,000,000-to-1 shot. Both his legs were amputated, but he still managed to cheat the Grim Reaper. His positive attitude is credited with helping him get through it all. Our final survivor is a victim of war. Though others would call him a cold-blooded killer, he's still a remarkable example of someone who triumphed against impossible odds. Number 1. Hiroo Onoda. During World War II, soldier Hiroo Onoda's dedication to the Japanese Empire knew no bounds, and he had this determination put to the ultimate test after spending nearly 30 years on Lubang Island in the Philippines. Hold on a minute, 3 decades? Didn't the war only last a few years? Thing is, no one told Onoda, and he held his remote position until someone finally managed to convince him to stop in 1974. In the meantime, however, he was still on active duty, wearing the same old uniform and relying on his wits and what he could find or steal to survive. The local population, who'd long moved into peacetime, found themselves often coming face to face with the ferocity of Onoda, who continued killing people he genuinely thought were his enemy. Didn't family and others try to stop him? They certainly did. Unfortunately, Onoda took his military training very seriously. Communications from the outside world were viewed with heavy suspicion, and these invaders claimed to be his family, but Onoda just wouldn't have it, thinking he was being tricked. Eventually, he yielded and began thinking that maybe they were telling the truth. Ultimately, an adventurer named Norio Suzuki managed to track Onoda down and talked him into rejoining civilization. Onoda was pardoned for his aggressive actions, which for him were committed in the line of duty. Others disagreed. He killed 30 people over that period and remained a controversial, if not tragic, figure. Onoda passed away in 2014, having managed to live a long civilian life outside of the conflict. Thanks for watching. Are there any insane survival stories you feel should have been included on this list? Let us know in the comments. Be sure to subscribe, and see you next time on the Board Badger.